Welcome to Course 1, Module 2, Taxonomy and Theoretical Foundations. I think we should start by talking about how animal-assisted interventions or animal-assisted services are not standalone careers. They're actually complementary to the work that you're already doing. So there is no such thing as an animal-assisted therapist. Next, let's take a look at some of the terminology. We've got a lot of confusion in terminology, and we're going to talk a little bit about what historically has been tried to be used and some of the downfalls and some of the new terminology that international groups have come together to get agreement upon. So in recent times, animal-assisted interventions is a global term with subcategories of animal-assisted activity, animal-assisted education, and animal-assisted therapy. So you can see here animal-assisted activities may include things like animal-assisted crisis response, visits to hospitals and nursing homes, visitations to at-risk or delinquent youth programs. Animal-assisted therapy has been under the direction of a licensed degreed healthcare or human service provider, such as a psychotherapist, social work, physical therapy, speech therapy, occupational therapy, or a professional or paraprofessional that is utilizing the animal-assisted therapy service model. And then the third category is animal-assisted education. So you would have animal-assisted reading programs, humane education, teachers taking pets into classrooms after a certain amount of training to assist in the educational process. So over the past 2 years, Animal-Assisted Intervention International and the International Association for Human-Animal Interaction Organizations came together to try and professionalize the practice of animal-assisted interventions. The first step in that was to come up with some uniform terminology that could be used globally. Now, the reason this is important is that when you're searching for terms, if you're looking up animal-assisted therapy, then you would expect that it is therapist guided. But with current terminology, that isn't always the case. There's also additional words such as a therapy dog, which one would assume that that dog is doing some sort of therapy. And while volunteer visiting dogs have therapeutic value, they aren't formal therapy, right? So the organizations came together and formed a group, an international consortium for animal-assisted interventions. Again, it was worldwide. We wanted to make sure that the terminology would work worldwide so that when we are doing research and looking up research and looking at protocols and all of these things, we could agree on what it is that we were talking about. So Amy Johnson Binder, who is one of the instructors in this course, headed up the terminology group. And let's talk a little bit about what they found. This article will be newly published in October of 2023. It's a special edition put out by the American Psychological Association Human-Animal Interaction Bulletin. So I'm certain that we will end up sending all of that to all of you to read. The new proposed terminology changes that umbrella term of animal-assisted interventions to animal-assisted services. And then the subcategories would be animal-assisted treatment, animal-assisted education, and animal-assisted support programs. And then there are things like human-animal interactions, which were not part of the terminology project. So this is sort of a scheme of what the terminology is that our group came up with. And you can see here that with animal-assisted treatment, it is operated more by clinicians, must operate within the scope of practice and a country's regulations. The treatment goals are defined, outcomes are measured and documented. The provider is a licensed, agreed, or credentialed healthcare human service provider who may either handle an animal themselves, or they may call in a team of a dog and a human to assist in their programs. So regardless, the animal is always prepared, evaluated, trained, and or registered for work in whatever category it is doing. So treatment focus would be occupational therapy, mental health services, counseling, speech therapy, etc. Animal-assisted education remains exactly the same. There are academic goals. They're defined. The outcomes are measured and documented. We're talking about outcomes for the humans involved. So remember, in this case, if we're talking about healthcare and human service providers working with animals within their scope of practice, the animal is assisting in the therapist or educator's formal healthcare or teaching plan. So it is not some magic fairy dust, that a dog or a horse, walks into a session and that everything is just better. We've got to remember that there are licensed, degreed, or credentialed individuals that have a plan already established for their client, and they have made animals a part of that. Then we look at animal-assisted support programs. This was formerly known as animal-assisted activities. So the definition of this is, this may be something like volunteer visiting. The benefits are identified, but not necessarily defined. The outcomes are not necessarily measured or documented, but they could be. And the provider is a volunteer or a paraprofessional trained in animal-assisted support programs, who is typically also the handler. And so you may take a look at this again, recognize some of them from previous slides: animal-assisted crisis response, reading programs, writing for the disabled, etc., etc. So let's take a look at them side by side and compare. So before, we had the global term of animal-assisted interventions, and now the big global categorical term would be animal-assisted services. Then there are the subcategories. Animal-assisted therapy becomes animal-assisted treatment. Animal-assisted education becomes animal-assisted education. And then animal-assisted activities takes on the new name of animal-assisted support programs. Again, these are to better explain the job that a person and an animal is doing. It also helps the person who is participating in services or their caregivers understand the role of the person and the dog or the horse or the rabbit that they are participating with. So for the purposes of this course, because we are on the brink of this paper being put out there in October, you have got the choice of sticking with the terms on the left side, which are animal-assisted interventions, with the subcategory of animal-assisted therapy, animal-assisted education, and animal-assisted activities. And so you would use those terms and those terms only throughout the entire course, or you can use the new proposed, which is animal-assisted services, animal-assisted treatment, animal-assisted education, and animal-assisted support programs. More often than not, individuals in this course focus on just one of these things. So for me, let's say that it would be animal-assisted treatment if I'm talking about occupational therapy. And so I would use that term throughout the course. So we've got some additional slides here. You can take a peek at the handouts that further explain what it is that we just went over. I won't bore you with those. Okay, now the next thing we should talk about is that animal assisted interventions or animal assisted services should not be confused with some of these other jobs that human animal teams might do. So we can talk about emotional support animals, which here in the United States are just companion animals. And so for those who enjoy animals, they may have therapeutic value, but again, it's not therapy. And so these are pets. They don't have any kind of public access rights other than places that are dog friendly where dogs are already allowed to go. There are some accommodations that can be made for living environments. And so if you are an individual with a disability and your mental health provider has recommended that you have an emotional support animal, then you may be able to have that animal living with you in situations in which dogs are not normally allowed to be. But again, it has to be prescribed, as they say. So emotional support animals may be an animal of any species that provides companionship and comfort to individuals with psychological disorders. It does not have to be trained to perform any particular task. But the use of the idea of emotional support animals must be supported by that qualified physician, psychiatrist, or mental health professional based upon a disability-related need. Emotional support animals are not considered service animals and under the ADA, and they do not have the same public access rights as assistance dogs. But again, they may be allowed to live in some housing facilities and may be able to go on to some smaller airlines. They may or may not be allowed to be in workplaces, schools, universities. They get to set their own policies. So I've included some emotional support animal laws here because it helps define what it is that we're talking about. Now, this is the problem when emotional support animals were allowed on airlines. Everybody was taking their animals. They weren't trained. Dogs were having anxiety and stress and explosive diarrhea. There were a lot of airline staff who were being bitten by dogs when they were serving, drinks or meals or things like that, because they have to lean across close proximity, and that is something called social pressure. And unless your dog is prepared for that on this big scary flight that vibrates and makes a lot of noise, then it's no wonder that they can have a little bit of behavior. The good news is emotional support animal laws such as the Air Carrier Access Act has been challenged, and now commercial airlines do not have to allow emotional support animals to fly. That's good news for animals and animal welfare. Okay, other things that animal assisted interventions or animal assisted services are not. So assistance animals are something completely different. You can have a guide dog who is trained for visual impairments or those who are blind, a hearing dog for those who are hearing impaired or are completely deaf. And then there are service animals that, by definition, work for individuals doing a lot of other kinds of things other than guide and hearing. So the person may have physical disability. The dog may provide some sort of medical response or alert, such as diabetes or seizures. There can be some psychiatric disabilities, but again, we've got to make sure that we are not confusing this with an emotional support animals. And we'll get into this a little bit more in another slide. And then, also for autism. I think the big thing to understand is that assistance dogs or assistance animals do not have any rights at all. People with disabilities who have dogs that work for them are the ones who have rights. People are protected by the Americans with Disabilities Act, and they are allowed to have assistance animals. So they are the ones who have laws that protect them. So there are some definitions here of disability and how it impacts major life activities or bodily functions and different things that a dog may be able to assist with. The Americans with Disabilities Act, Title III, defines a service animal as any dog that is individually trained to work or perform tasks for the benefit of an individual with a disability, including physical, sensory, psychiatric, intellectual, or other mental disability. Again, we don't want to confuse psychiatric with an emotional support animal. They're very different. Assistance dogs are task trained and may be able to recognize and respond to specific situations. According to the United States Department of Justice, if a dog has been trained to sense that an anxiety attack is about to happen and take a specific action to help avoid the attack or lessen its impact, that would qualify as a service animal. However, if the dog's mere presence provides comfort, that would not be considered a service animal under the ADA, but it would be considered an emotional support animal. So some other words that can be very, very confusing out there in the world of animal-assisted interventions or services are certificate, which is what you're earning in this course. So you're getting a certificate of attendance saying that you studied and you successfully completed this course with 160 hours. To be certified is something completely different. And currently, there is no governing body that everybody around the world, or even in the United States, agrees upon to be that governing body. There are some volunteer visiting organizations that say, no, we will, train you and your animal, or we will evaluate you and your animal, and then we will register you and your animal for volunteer visiting. And then there are other organizations that say, oh no, you're going to be certified. But we have to be really careful, and it's just kind of buyer beware. You need to understand, what do they mean by certified? And so you need to ask that question. Do they certify their own work? Or is there a completely separate entity that has, come up with the certification process? It can be really tricky for an organization to do all of the training and education and then evaluation and then certify their own teams. It can be a conflict of interest. So if you think about me being an occupational therapist, I went to university, the school did a great job, trained me, evaluated me, sent me out on field work, but I still had to sit for my board exams to become an occupational therapist. And that was a separate entity from the educational institution in which I got my education, right? So ask a lot of questions, because you want to make sure you understand what that certification means. Is it an internal certification, or is it certified by a separate organization? And then again, register just means that organizations and the individuals who participated can say, well, we have gone through this process, we are registered, maybe they have my evaluations on file, maybe they have my visiting logs on file, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the trick is that there are very few organizations that offer education, evaluation, insurance, and hands-on practicum for animal-assisted therapy, also called animal-assisted treatment, and animal-assisted education. Those ones get to be the really tricky ones, because the dogs are doing completely different jobs than volunteer visiting, which has been known as animal-assisted activities and now animal-assisted support programs. So again, I'm an occupational therapist. I have been evaluated. I sat for my boards for occupational therapy. That doesn't mean that I can call myself a physical therapist. That's a totally different thing. So we need to really stop and think about this evaluation process of practical skills of teams, of Melissa Winkle, the occupational therapist, and her dog, who does animal assisted therapy or animal assisted treatment is the new term. I can't take the test for animal assisted activities, now called animal assisted support programs, and say that because my dog and I passed the volunteer visiting test, that makes us good for animal assisted therapy. We need to understand that the jobs can be very, very different. Sometimes the jobs aren't different at all, but for those that are different, they are really different. And some of those examples would be that my dogs work with me all day long. It doesn't mean they work the entire day that we're there. I have the luxury of having between 8 and 10 dogs in my practice at any given time, and the dogs rotate. And they have specific clients they like, specific activities, et cetera, et cetera. The dogs are allowed to pick out their clients. And it just kind of all works out. The dogs end up having a lot of great breaks during the day. We have an open dog door policy, so the dogs can come and go as they please. They're allowed to walk out of sessions if they want to, et cetera, et cetera. So that is very different than me and my dog being a social butterfly at the a children's hospital, for example. My work with my animals is very focused on my client goals versus the social butterfly, right? Now, here's the other thing. Not every dog is the social butterfly. Not every dog is going to be really great at that, at volunteer visiting. They may like just one person at a time doing 1 or 2 activities, right? They're 2 different dogs. And it doesn't mean that one is better than the other one. It means that they're different jobs, the same way that occupational therapy and speech therapy and physical therapy are all different, but they're all very complementary to each other. Okay, so now let's talk about human interactions, and those are activities in which we have interactions with animals, right? We're walking down the street, we see a cute dog. Hey, nice dog. May I pet your dog? We squat down, invite the dog to come and say hi to us. And those are interactions, right? But then there's also a human-animal bond, and that's usually something that happens over time. And we develop a relationship. We see each other frequently enough that we get to know each other. You know, we care about each other, and we look forward to seeing each other. And it's a bond. It's matured over time. Other terms that we want you to think about are use. When people say, oh, I use my dog for animal assisted therapy. Well, what does that really mean? It's pretty utilitarian to say that you're going to just use an animal. For me and my animals, we have relationships, and I work with my animals rather than use them. So I feel like your word choices can imply the intent. And you're going to see me bring this up in slide after slide throughout this course, because I think it's really, really important. Think about this. I'm going to command my dog to sit versus I'm going to cue my dog to sit. Do you feel the difference? So do I use my animal, or do I work with them? Do I command my animal, or do I cue them? Right? So very, very different intentions. So think about that when you're making your word choices, whether you're having conversations, or if you're doing writing, or if you're, making up your brochures or pamphlets, or your capstone project. We want to make sure that you are choosing your words wisely, because our clients are always watching us, and we need to lead by example. And, it's a much different relationship to have a dog do a bunch of commands and a bunch of tricks versus having a relationship with the animal that you work with as a team with your clients, patients, or students. So we've included a couple of bullet points here for you with certification versus certificate, so you can look at those at your leisure. Remember, in this course, you are getting a certificate. You are not getting a certification. That is very different. Okay. So again, we talked about human-animal interaction and the human-animal bond. Well, let's take a look at an example of a human-animal bond.
So I got an email that says this. Dear Mr. Lethal, I'm a 60-year-old woman named Darcy from St. Cloud, Minnesota. Now, I have to admit, I'm not a huge fan of rap music. However, I love the videos you make where you rap songs and poems written by other people who don't know how to rap. My grandkids showed them to me, and I admire you greatly for doing this for other people. I've written a song about someone near and dear to my heart and would be honored to hear you sing it. Sincerely, Darcy. Well, Darcy, this is for you. This is dedicated to Darcy. My name is Darcy, and I'd like to tell my story about my best friend who's in another category. See, I was always happy. I took care of myself. I enjoyed life. I always stayed in perfect health. When I was 52, my telephone rang. My doctor told me the results from my biopsy came. He sounded so upset, so hurt by his tone. He told me I had cancer in my bones. I was in shock. I was out of breath. Up until this moment, I was never scared of death. But when you find out you have cancer, it's like the Grim Reaper rings your doorbell and waits for you to answer. When I was going through chemotherapy, my husband walked in with a gift just for me. It was a puppy. Instantly, I loved him, my sweetest baby boy. I named him Muffins. From the beginning, I knew I'd love you till the end. From the beginning, I knew I'd love you till the end. From the beginning, I knew I'd love you till the end. You're my best friend. My medication used to keep me up at night. I felt so weak, I didn't have the strength to fight. Muffins could feel it. He understood my plight, and he radiated energy that made me feel all right. At times, I swore death was coming soon. It's what I feared. I'd snuggle Muffins and quietly let out my tears. I'd tell him, you were such a precious doggy. I felt him pull the sickness out of my body. He took away my pain. He took away my tears. I finally got the phone call after a couple years. My doctor said I have some great news. I'm about to wipe away all your pain and your blues. I want you to sit down and listen. Darcy, your cancer has gone into remission. I cried tears of joy. I felt like I could live forever. I swear the love from my puppy made me feel better. From the beginning, I knew I'd love you till the end. From the beginning, I knew I'd love you till the end. From the beginning, I knew I'd love you till the end. You're my best friend. Not even 9 months later, Muffin started showing strange behavior. He wouldn't eat, he wouldn't play, he wouldn't move. This wasn't my baby, he wasn't in his best mood. His heartbeat sounded so frantic in his chest. So we took him to the vet and we ran a few tests. The vet didn't call me back for weeks, but when he finally called me, I simply couldn't speak. I remember when the telephone rang. I remember being crushed by the pain. He sounded so upset, so hurt by his tone. He told me that Muffins had cancer in his bones. It shocked me, broke the heart inside my ribs. It's like the cancer left my body and entered his within a year. My baby boy was gone. I hope I can keep his memory alive forever with this song. From the beginning, I knew I'd love you till the end. From the beginning, I knew I'd love you till the end. From the beginning, I knew I'd love you till the end. You're my best friend. You're my best friend. From the beginning, I knew I'd love you till the end. From the beginning, I knew I'd love you till the end. From the beginning, I knew I'd love you till the end. Dedicated to Muffins and Darcy.
Ooh, it's always a hard one to listen to, but it's a great example of the human animal bond. Right, let's get back to our slideshow here. Okay. So now we're going to move on to some theory. So a theory is a set of analytical principles or statements designed to structure our observations, understanding, and explanation of the world. They typically present a set of variables and specific predictions. There should be a clear explanation of how certain variables or relationships will lead to certain events. So some of the theories that we talk about in animal assisted interventions or animal assisted services are the biophilia hypothesis, biocentrism, Bowlby's attachment theory, human animal relation theory. So the biophilia hypothesis suggests that humans have a deeply grounded affiliation with animals, which naturally draws our attention towards them and maybe their attention to us. And so this is attention and interest to other species. Biocentrism describes the view or belief that the rights and needs of humans are not more important than those of other living things, and that humans may regard animals as informants about the environment. So how many of you have ever said, oh, well, I can't be friends with them, or that can't be my girlfriend or boyfriend because my dog didn't like them? Or you're sitting home alone and you hear a noise, and the first thing you do is look at your dog to see if they heard the noise too, right? And so we're always looking to them as informants about the environment, whether it be other people, places, or things. Bowlby's attachment theory describes the human's need to protect and to be protected. It explains that humans attain proximities to others who they perceive have better coping mechanisms than themselves. It's an underlying biological function, and it is protection. Pets hold roles as family members, friends, companions, confidants, and outlets for affection or support. So Cynthia Chandler, you'll hear from her later in this course. She is absolutely fantastic. She has several books that we highly recommend, but one of the interesting things that she talks about is the human animal relational theory. So she developed the human animal relational theory, or HART, in the context of animal assisted therapy in counseling. But I think it's safe to say that we can generalize this to a lot of other disciplines as well. So animal assisted therapy and counseling integrates human animal interactions into counseling sessions and is utilized by many other disciplines. It is the successful integration that can bring forth conscious and unconscious motivational forces that can be addressed and processed within sessions. HART guides the facilitation of human animal interactions with the sessions that you are in. So the interactions introduce the opportunity for a therapeutic relational moment. And so that's an RM between the animal, the client, and the counselor. We can see this in several different ways. Those relational moments can occur between a client and a therapy animal and give the counselor or the other healthcare provider a lot of good information, good observations. Relational moments can happen between a counselor and a therapy animal while the client is observing. And so you may see this, like in my clinic, we get a new client who's come in. Yeah, they've been to OT before. They hated it. They don't like therapists. They don't want to talk to anybody about anything. They don't want to do anything that is hard for them, all of those kinds of things. But when they walk in and they see my dog leaning up against me, snuggling in, wagging its tail, looking at them, looking at me, they think, wow, if that animal can trust her, maybe I could too. Maybe it's worth a shot. Relational moments can also happen between the client and the counselor while the therapy animal is observing. And so you may see this in a lot of different ways. Sometimes in a mental health session, for example, somebody may have some anxiety or some anger or something that strikes strong emotional outcomes of behavior, a change in voice, a change in heart rate, all of those kinds of things. And our animals respond to that. Relational moments can also happen during simultaneous counselor or provider client animal interactions. But relational moments just provide the opportunity for recognition and processing of a client's unconscious and conscious motivations. Then there are things like discipline-specific theories. I'm going to use the example of occupational therapy in the 5th edition in your textbook. From page 387 to 391, you will see an article that we did on this area. And then we also look at the American Occupational Therapy Association Occupational Therapy Practice Framework, Domain and Process. So animal-assisted therapy and animal-assisted activities, if we're working on something not so goal-oriented, may lend themselves to the occupation-centered models, to the ecological model, to client factors, skills, and areas of intervention. It may give us insight into mental health, sensory integration. It lends itself to cognitive rehab and physical disability rehabilitation. But another interesting thing happens in my clinic for adults with developmental disabilities or physical disabilities. When they want to integrate back into the community or integrate for the first time ever, one of the ways we can do that is if their animal is a good candidate, to have them go and do volunteer visiting. Going through that process is very educational. They do some continuing education, they do some evaluation. Before the evaluation, we work on some training and some mock sessions, all of those kinds of things. So a lot of really great discipline-specific theoretical opportunities. So what is a model? Well, models simplify a phenomenon, whether as a whole or a specific part of a phenomenon. Models are more specific in explanation, whereas theories are both explanatory and descriptive. So some of the models that we can discuss here are competencies by Stewart, Chang, and Rice's model of practice in animal-assisted therapy and counseling, animal-assisted therapy in the recovery model, and trauma-informed approach. So Stewart, Chang, and Rice's model has 4 central components that are integrated, and they're cyclical. Each component has a reciprocal relationship with the other components. So in this case, counseling professionals, and again, it's safe to say that these can also lend themselves to other disciplines, who utilize animal-assisted therapy, develop a specific set of skills and competencies. They utilize a highly developed working relationship with a therapy animal. They purposefully impact the therapeutic process, and they enhance the scope of traditional counselor or provider client relationships. When we look at the recovery model, animal-assisted therapy or animal-assisted treatment can be incorporated with existing models, such as the recovery model. So this uses a broad approach to mental health treatment that views the recovery process as a journey. This model encourages agency for oneself, self-determination, symptoms management strategies, and participation in meaningful activities. Activities such as yoga, or yoga with dogs, is one way to incorporate animal-assisted therapy or animal-assisted treatment in the recovery model. Yoga uses calming exercises while the dog lies nearby as a source of focus and relaxing energy. This activity shows clients beneficial coping strategies that can be incorporated in daily life. Now let's move on to framework. A framework is a structure, overview, outline, system, or plan consisting of various descriptive categories, such as concepts, constructs, variables, and the relations between them that are presumed to account for a phenomenon. Frameworks only fit phenomena into categories and do not provide any explanation. And so some of the frameworks that we can discuss are the International Consortium for Animal Assisted Interventions, with the terminology paper that is upcoming this October, One Welfare Framework, and One Health Framework. So again, the Animal Assisted Services schematic here with animal assisted treatment, education, and animal assisted support programs fit this criteria. Here's some other additional areas that were not necessarily finalized in this project, but a really great start. Okay, so One Health and One Welfare. You're going to see a lot more of this in your careers as you dive deeper into animal assisted interventions or animal assisted services. So One Health is a concept that provides a worldwide strategy for expanding and fostering interdisciplinary collaborations and communications in all aspects of health for humans, animals, and the environment. One Welfare is a concept that describes the interrelationship between animal welfare, human well-being, and the physical and social environment. So the One Welfare framework aims to facilitate interdisciplinary collaboration around each of the 5 section topics. Complementing One Health and One Welfare provides a better understanding of issues affecting animals, people, and their environment. And so here you can take a peek at both of those. You'll have more reading on this soon. So again, I want to remind you about word choices and how it may shape your actions. Okay, so if you have any questions or comments on this module, you can certainly send us an email. Again, we try to respond within 48 hours. The weekends are sort of hit and miss.